Element Mystic recently left the Pacific Showdown victorious, while mostly leaning on Sombra GOATS on their path to the title. It's a composition that isn't quite as reliable as the conventional 3-3, but when mastered and executed to perfection, it can give weaker GOATS teams a run for their money. Since EM have clearly invested a ton of time into the composition, they were very well drilled in Sombra GOATS fundamentals and managed to beat O2 in the final. Sombra GOATS generally loses out in neutral brawls against 3-3 due to Diva's damage mitigation. This means that Sombra GOATS is at its weak point during first fight scenarios, and it scales up in strength as EMP charge nears 100. If you manage to get the EMP fast enough without giving up too much in the process, be it map control, health, or a kill, and then proceed to cycle your ultimates correctly, then you can potentially do some serious damage with this composition. But how do you get past these tricky neutral fights against GOATS and milk time effectively en route to hitting your power spike? Let's study some film. When it comes to control maps, there simply isn't enough time for Sombra GOATS to farm EMP prior to the point opening up. Since you can't win in a straight brawl, you almost always have to cede map control, give up the point, with the intention of slowly grinding it back. Bearing any critical mistake by your opponents, you are forced to play slow and farm EMP. You can only engage if you have a great advantage in the shape of a hack, a significant health advantage, or preferably both. In this situation, Element Mystic don't have to do much. After capturing the point, O2 are playing very passively on the point, and they use their Zarya bubbles to survive rather than to put pressure on EM, who in turn proceed to take back map control due to Kaiser's shield and HP disadvantage. You should always try to do everything you can to prevent Sombra GOATS from playing at this slow of a tempo during neutrals, or you're pretty much doomed. However, even getting a hack doesn't always guarantee you an opening. Here EM once again give up map control while waiting for Doha to work his magic. Even though he does land an early hack, EM are already at an HP disadvantage, and there is no way for them to close this large of a distance before Kaiser takes cover behind the pillar. EM is able to set up Doha in a power position above the point to farm EMP, but is naturally losing out in the brawl. They end up kiting to give Doha more time, but they've lost a ton of HP in the initial trade, and Kaiser snipes Sparkle with a Fire Strike, which is something he can do with relevant consistency due to the lack of a Diva. When the map is a little more open, it's good for Sombra to take off angles and flank a little rather than just frontlining. That way it might be easier to get a hack, find a pick like Doha does here, and farm more EMP. You also force the enemies to look in a different direction, and in turn relieve some pressure on your front line. However, if he doesn't get the pick and Doha is forced to translocate out early, it's crucial that his team starts kiting while he translocates into an area where he can still provide some pressure, either from behind the shield or another off angle. His translocator placement in this particular play would allow him to do just that. Here are some potential alternative scenarios and rotations that could happen in this neutral fight. EM would have to match Doha's tempo, funnel resources into him as he takes off angles or pressures closer to the shield while waiting for O2 to either make a mistake or for the EMP to come online. If you would like to study these alternative scenarios a little closer, you can pause the video here. Because you have to surrender map control and objective pressure in neutral fights, it becomes increasingly harder to defend with Sombra GOATS, especially on hybrid and some assault maps. You are immediately put on the clock from the beginning. Can you get EMP before the point is capped, or force the enemy to make a mistake? The same goes for control maps, but the value of giving up a point in hybrid and certainly assault maps is far greater than a couple of percentage points in a control map. You can see exactly that playing out here, as Krong and Pelican of the O2 Blast take turns marking Doha without committing to him, and he's still pretty far off of his EMP when the point is nearly capped. O2 Blast does everything well, but Kaiser doesn't get a Zarya bubble, gets bashed, and blows up in Element Mystic's final desperate attempt to salvage the cap. Had that not happened, O2 could have enrolled on a pretty hefty snowball. O2 also started the fight with a little fake rotation, going through lobby and then going back in through main, perhaps expecting Doha to pivot with a translocator in one of the windows. From that type of a position, he would have a nice crossfire setup and he could farm safely while receiving resources from his teammates. Instead, Doha just played on the ground behind the shield or with a lesser crossfire setup, not getting maximum value but still constantly drawing aggro toward himself. Here on Blizzard World, we have a similar example. Element Mystic could let O2 Blast onto the point like they did on King's Row, but then they'd once again be opting for a passive approach and once again be reliant on their opponents making an error to survive the neutral. However, unlike King's Row, the attackers actually path right under the defense here, and EM opts to drop and look for a quick kill with Doa on a slight off angle. When EM drops, Alpha theoretically sees the potential to swing on 6 opponents. However, O2 quickly scatters, and the lack of Diva Matrix essentially only allows Alpha 2 swings, while the defense also loses Hanbin in the process. Now, if O2 just slows things down a little from here on out, they'd likely win the fight. However, while retreating, Undyne sneaks in a Discord on Myunbong and hits a shot or two while Sparkle can spam him down from mid-range. This clutch trade buys EM a little more time to farm EMP, and they immediately take high ground, which prevents O2 Blast from pushing up too far. Undyne also ends up sniping Pelican for good measure. These neutral fights were extremely close, but ultimately EM found ways to clutch even when situations seemed rough. When you see Sombra GOATS winning first fights on hybrid defenses, it usually happens due to similar clutch plays. It's certainly not impossible to control your fate at least a little more in neutral fights with Sombra GOATS, especially on maps which feature long pathing routes to the objective for the attackers and a lot of high ground to anchor around for the defense. Point A of Volskaya Industries is a good example of this. Because Element Mystic's frontline is sitting safely up on the high ground, the defense can afford to funnel all their resources into their Sombra. This includes Zarya bubbles, and it allows the Sombra player to stand very far in front of his team and set up farming checkpoints while the attackers rotate around the map and try to get to the objective. Here, Hanbin is contesting the point from a safe distance while Doha and the rest of his team set up a great concave around him. It's extremely difficult to push through this without clearing the high ground for the attackers, as is reflected in the lack of cap progress and Doha's ult charge. Opting to not clear the high ground is a highly unconventional way to attack this point, but it's clearly a set play by O2. While EM is distracted, Pelican sneaks behind on his own, syncs up with his Zen and Diva, and surprises the Sombra by stunning and bursting him down. O2 tries this a second time on the following round, but surrendering superior position for too long can be costly. As a result, they lose a ton of HP, and Myunbong dies in the process before the play can materialize. Here's a way to visualize another approach during this stage 1 match between the Mayhem and the Justice. Washington clear the high ground, attempt to jump over, but get booped. They proceed to put pressure on the point and force BQB to translocate out while he's just at 40% on his EMP. However, BQB rotates back to that power position, and even though Washington amps up the tempo and pushes Florida's frontline, the Zarya and the Sombra both maintain high ground positions as well as a crossfire. This allows the two primary damage dealers of Florida to farm freely as reflected in their ult charge. Even though the Mayhem win this fight and do relatively well, the execution wasn't perfect. BQB's translocator was placed too far away from his desirable position, and he put himself out of the fight for an extended period of time. He could have either had his translocator closer to that position, or potentially even have used the translocator to jump up there once Washington dropped. In the first round, this also happened and proved more costly. Here, Zarya got booped down from the high ground, and BQB placed his translocator far away from the fight. He also didn't take the time to rotate up to high ground while Washington was waiting out a hack and recharging resources. As a result, the Justice were able to take turns to mark him, just like we saw in the earlier King's Row example. They also forced him to kite around the corner, out of range of the rest of his team. Being outside the LOS to receive Armor Pack and Harmony Orb, he was forced to translocate out, and Washington cleaned things up, having negated all the threats. Had BQB taken the high ground position, it would have been much harder to accomplish, and he likely would have been able to farm his EMP in time. Here's another good way to visualize the farming checkpoints on maps with a lot of high ground. Here BQB goes from spawn to one roof onto the next, being able to pressure and farm from the high ground while receiving resources from his team. Lucia and Ryan eventually drop to act as bait, while the rest of the team maintains high ground control. This amount of pressure is incredibly difficult to deal with, and the Mayhem managed to leverage these positions into a free DMAC and a kill and an EMP. When the Sombra GOATS is on the attacking side, this script flips a little. You still want to farm up your EMP, but you are not under as much time pressure as on defense. As such, it is up to the defense to slow that process down and choke the attackers out of map control. Here, O2 tries to do just that early and almost kill Doa in the process. However, Element Mystic wisely disengages and weathers the early storm, waiting for Doa to set up again. EM finally gets a bit of room and starts throwing resources Doa's way, which frees up some space. As soon as all the high grounds are clear, it's pretty much game over for the defense. Look at this crossfire and all the angles that EM has taken control of. Since the defense has lost all map control at this point and has no target to quickly speed at and run over, they're essentially sitting ducks who are at the mercy of Doa's impending EMP. When O2 Blast adjusts in the following round and opts for a slower approach on high ground, EM simply takes the other side of the map, allows Doa to pressure the point, gives him all the resources, and starts poking while also taking over more and more high ground space. Look at how Doa here immediately slides into the space on high ground that O2 has just freed up. O2 makes an attempt to push the tempo, but EM kites nicely while Doa drops to stay in the play, but immediately places a new translocator on high ground entirely surrounding the poor blast. Here's another example where Element Mystic goes through all the necessary steps. Doa pressures the point, forces O2 to drop, and EM rotates around the map. O2 proceeds to assume the next dominant high ground position, while Element Mystic goes through the motions. They maintain constant LOS on Doa at a safe distance from their opponents. Doa then starts moving towards his team, obviously having called out that Myungbong has dropped and that his team can take a 6 versus 5 on the high ground. O2 Blast are forced to leave the high ground, but they understand the predicament that they're in and immediately seek to retake the high ground as a team. Being unable to brawl, EM give it up, but all this dancing around the map without a true 6 versus 6 all-in move has bought Doa enough time to farm his EMP. Unfortunately, Doa ends up EMPing a little outside his team's effective follow-up range, and the blast punished their opponents as a result. So that's it. As you can see, there is a lot of finesse to the Sombra GOATS compositions, and Element Mystic clearly has a very high understanding of how to tilt the odds a little in their favor during these generally disadvantageous neutral fight scenarios. Overwatch League teams have so far proven that elite 3-3 teams who are well drilled with the composition make very few mistakes and can dispose of a team relying on Sombra GOATS over a 4-map set without too much trouble. However, if your roster lacks the ability to match other teams in 3-3, Sombra GOATS is a viable alternative to steal some maps and beat up on weaker teams. Thanks for watching, guys. To keep supporting this type of content and the channel, hit the magical subscribe and like buttons. Also, make sure you hop onto the Mineral Miners Discord to join the community and potentially take advantage of some coaching. You can find the link in the description box down below.